there is no way that I can prepare you as a teacher for every scenario that you will encounter, right? As a teacher educator, you are going to need problem solving, ingenuity, and creativity every day of your life at your job.
Welcome to Hallway Conversations. We're a trio of educators who have plenty of questions about teaching and learning and school culture, and we believe in the value of reflection and collaboration as we seek to keep growing as teachers. This podcast is our place for thinking out loud together about issues in education and why they might matter to Christian educators. Welcome to the conversation.
Hello everyone, welcome to Hallway Conversations. My name's Matt Beamers.
I'm Abby DeGroat.
And I'm Dave Mulder.
Friends, we're always looking for topics of conversation or feedback on our podcast, so please email us at hallwayconvospod@gmail.com. That's hallwayconvospod@gmail.com. We want to hear from you. Dave, you've got a quote. I know this. We all think highly of David Smith, and we actually hope to interview him at some point.
Yeah, it would be great to get him on here.
He's agreed to be on our podcast, but why don't you share what you have there?
Yeah, so the book I'm holding in my hands is On Christian Teaching, Practicing Faith in the Classroom by David Smith. We've mentioned the book on the podcast before, and this has become one of my favorite books about teaching and bringing our faith to bear on what we're doing in teaching. I'm reading it right now, rereading it with some grad students in the class I'm teaching right now. And the chapter we're reading is chapter 6, which is it's titled See, Engage, and Reshape. And Smith here is trying to help us think about kind of the work of imagination for Christian teachers. And I'd like to just read a little bit from the book here to kind of set context, and then I'll share a little bit of my story in response to it. Here's what Smith says. Seeing anew is an invitation to the work of imagination. Imagination in this instance does not mean fiction or poetry, creativity, or making things up that are not true. It refers to the stories, whether true or false, valid or far-fetched, that we tell ourselves and our students about exactly what it is we're doing and why. These stories are carried out in our words, our metaphors, our actions, our goals, our exhortations, our prohibitions. Imagination is in play when I ask myself whether my opening activity could serve as the purpose for communicating respect for students at the same time as providing some speaking practice. Or when I wonder if a language curriculum should be more colored by the goals of tourism and travel, future employment, intercultural learning, love of neighbor, or something else. Imagination is also at work when we wonder if a homework task that has until now been designed for solo labor, hunched over a worksheet or a screen, could be reworked to promote meaningful interaction with other family members or community members. Imagination is at work when we ponder whether a written assignment might foster different kinds of learning if reframed as a letter or addressed to a different audience, or when we realize that the practical design of a project can be structured to teach about collaboration or justice as well as technology. And he goes on from there, but the kinds of questions he's raising here, challenging us to see anew, to reimagine, to rethink what we're doing in our teaching practice. And in the discussion I'm having with my students about this section of the book, it's always interesting to me because they often respond to that and be like, yeah, that's really good and that's really challenging, and it helps me to rethink some things and reimagine things. And I feel like that's part of the struggle for me. When I was a young teacher especially, I kind of wanted this whole idea of teaching Christian. I wanted there to be some kind of a recipe or a formula, and then I would know, like, if I do these things in this order, now I've got it. I'm teaching Christianly. And the longer I've taught and the more I've grappled with this, I just don't think that's how it works. Like there's no formula for it, because there's a lot of ways to teach really well, and there's only a few ways to teach really poorly. And so how do you live that out? So I guess really what my students come to with this one too is to grapple with this idea and to say, so how do we reimagine what we're doing? What Smith really is encouraging us to think about is how well do my professed beliefs, the things I say I believe about my students, and the things I'm actually doing, how well do they really line up? And that's a good space for us to find ourselves in as teachers, I think.
Right. I so appreciate his focus on pedagogy.
Right.
And how that communicates things to our students, even above and beyond what the content that we're teaching.
Right. Because it causes us to, and that's part of this too, I guess, for our students. Like we think about reimagining our practice, but how do we help our students see anew as well, right? And our pedagogy is a lens for that, I think.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about, I think I've said before, as in my former life as a school principal, I'm going to say this the right way, because I think I overvalued asking questions about worldview, and I undervalued asking questions about pedagogy. Like, if you come in with a good worldview, I can teach you good pedagogy. And I actually feel like, not that, and please don't hear me saying worldview doesn't matter. Of course it matters.
Yep.
But it's like, man, give me a teacher that's really good at pedagogy, and we will, as a community, help you deepen your worldview. And I think I think I've realized over time that starting with a good teacher, good pedagogy, and building worldview, I don't want to say it's easier, but I think because good pedagogy requires good imagination, that transfers into imagining, deepening worldview.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? It's like, because you've already imagined something different here, maybe you can imagine something different here. So
versus not being able to make that connection.
between not being able to make that connection.
And it never happening.
Yeah, that I think sometimes that I didn't worry enough as a principal when it was apparent that people would think that one has nothing to do with the other, when actually one has everything to do with the other. And
my immediate reaction, I'm kind of nodding along here, like, yep. And then I was like, do I agree with that? I'm not sure I agree. But I think as I'm thinking that through, I think that these things, it's not a mutually exclusive kind of thing, either or, right?
Yeah.
Like I want both of these things at the
100%.
same time, right? And I think you're right on that, Matt, that strong pedagogy means that sense of imagining that opens you up to other possibilities then, right?
I guess I just, like I said, I'm not, it sounds like I'm undervaluing worldview. Please do not hear that. But everybody comes into our with our schools with a different world. Like they come in, right?
Yep.
And and so we had certain things we put high value on. But if I think about it from a parent perspective, man, do you want really good worldview and bad teaching?
No.
You want both. Of course you want
right.
both. But I think we'd err on one side than the other. And I think to hold them both up is really important.
And I think you can do some damage as a teacher if you're saying you value creative, responsible discipleship, and then you give students work that is neither creative, invites no responsibility, does not disciple them. I think you actually can hurt the gospel message that you're trying to profess.
Exactly. This is the bit that from what I read here, right? When Smith says, imaginations at work, and we wonder if a homework task that has until now been designed for solo labor hunched over a worksheet or a screen could be reworked, right? Like
I heard him tell a story in 2020 at the Deeper Learning Conference about his daughter.
Sure.
And saying that the one thing that was most damaging their family life was her homework from her Christian high school.
Yeah.
And
that's
saying,
interesting.
This is an unintended consequence.
Yeah.
So how can we reimagine an assignment to value interpersonal relationships or interactions instead of solo? Because if we're trying to develop a certain kind of student, yet everything we give them brings them away from their family into their room alone for hours at a time, how does that reality not line up with what we say?
Well, exactly. And that's I think the thing that I'm going to try to get us to here, right? When we think about the relationship between pedagogy and worldview, then, right? Like this is a very real way that you're actually living out your beliefs, right? Whether what you intended or not, like you're living out a belief in the kind of assignment that you're going to give to students then too.
But it also, if I think back, and maybe even I do this now, so I don't want to say I have it all sorted now, but I think part of the reason I would give assignments like that, where kids would go to their room, is it was a lack of imagination on but it was a lack of willing to give up control.
Oh yeah,
right. Like this is I have an idea and I know what those kids should learn and I know how they're going to learn it and this is the way. And I totally lacked imagination. In thinking about about something like homework or thinking about pedagogy, because if I am the center, if it's teacher centered and I'm at the center and my homework's at the center, then I probably wrongfully, but felt like I had an element of control. And then again, what is that communicating about worldview and pedagogy?
And I also think something about expectations of students, expectations of school, the way things are always done, right? Which is why I love his invitation to imagine something
different. Not just the way we've always done it.
I always start one of my classes with an assignment that is very open-ended and gives very little direction to my college students, and they hate it.
Yeah.
And then I tell them later why I do it that way, right? And it's a very open-ended creative assignment. Yeah. So in a college course, it's very unexpected for college freshmen and sophomores to respond this way, especially with as few guidelines as I give them. Yeah. And they always are like, oh. And some of them love it, the creative, and some of them hate it. Yeah. And then we talk about that and talk about how have we been shaped to not like creative, open-ended, and to not associate those with learning or real learning or, you know.
Right.
That's why when he says, like the phrase how he starts the paragraph, like seeing anew, like that, those two words really capture my imagination. And I think part of it is I just think it takes, quite honestly, at least I'll speak for myself, a lot of courage for me to ask, why do I do what I do, right?
That's the hard work.
Right? It's and I think it's really easy for me to ask other teachers or school leaders that, like, what's the rationale for this practice, right? And you know, and sometimes maybe the answer is as simple as, well, we've been doing it for 6 or 7 years, and that's the reason, and it seems to work, and no one's complained. That's not good enough.
Right.
And I say that in the context of me giving that reason as well. Well, it seems to work. Well, how do you know that it works? Right. Who's it best for? Is it best for Matt Beamers, or is it best for my students? And that's where I feel like, for me, it takes courage to ask, why do I do what I do? Because I might end up at the conclusion, I don't know. I don't know why I do what I do, or it's easiest for me, or I can't see anew. And this actually is why it's become so important for me. I have visited both your classrooms, and I've elicited feedback, or I debrief a class with you, or I've seen other colleagues teach, because that's one way for me to see anew, where I'll literally watch you know, like how your students interact with a Google Doc, or I see them giving presentations, where I literally will walk out of both your classes and say to myself, I never ever would have thought of that.
Right.
Like, I never would have thought of that. And that's where I feel like part of seeing anew is actually one way we help each other, like to do that in community, because it's hard to do.
Which requires vulnerability.
Totally.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
And willingness to open yourself up and high levels of trust.
And I was going to say, enough humility to admit that I might not have this all figured out yet, right?
Yeah.
But that's where I love, too, what you said. Like, there's not one way.
Oh, yeah. I believe that deeply, right? Like, I have preference for the way that I tend to do things in my classes, right? Part of that is, I think, the teaching methods you choose are partly your preference.
Yeah.
They should be rooted in best practice. They should be rooted in what's good for student learning.
Yeah.
Yes,
but there
those
are
are
thousands of ways to put together a course. We're prepping, right? Right now I'm in the middle of class prep, and I love it, right? And it's like that it's creative work for me.
Sure. Yeah. It's imagination
work. It is imagination work.
Yeah.
And I love to pour creativity into that part of the semester to get my syllabus ready to go, and to think through how could this be different? I came up with a really cool opening activity, right, for one of my courses that I'm really excited about. And it's creative work, but it didn't have to be that way.
Yeah. Well, that's why I found it fascinating when he earlier in the books talks about how he uses the first 9 minutes.
Oh, yes.
Of a class, right? To say, like, what do I all want to communicate in the first 10 minutes or the first 12 minutes? And I think about that, and I'm thinking about the teachers who are listening, but I'm thinking about the three of us. In a month, literally, we're going to be starting the school year.
Oh, my goodness.
And I know, let that shiver run up your spine for a minute.
It'll be great.
But I think maybe the challenge for the three of us, and maybe for the teachers who are listening, to say, how do you want to use the first 10 minutes of the semester? How do you want to use the first 15 minutes of the semester? Because you only get one shot, you know. And I think he even talks about, like, if you do a survey about how students are feeling about your class at the end of the first class or the first week, and you do that survey at the end of the school year, that there's actually a strong correlation there, right? And that scares me quite a bit, to be honest. But so do I want to spend the first 10 minutes going over the syllabus? Do I want to first spend the first 10 minutes going over the rules? And that it's not that there's not a time and place for that.
Sure.
But
does it need to be the first 10 minutes?
Does it need to be the first 10? When you have students who are there with fear and trepidation or nervousness or anxiety, I can imagine teaching a freshman high school or freshman university class where there is already people whose anxiety is pretty high.
Yeah.
How might I use that first 10 or 12 minutes to do something that's oriented to learning, still like hitting learning targets, but also communicates hospitality and learning and collaboration. And that's where I think about seeing anew, like, why do I want to do this in the first 10 minutes? And what might happen if I try something totally different, which again, I think takes a lot of courage, right? Because it's easy to do what we've always done. I'm using 2 new texts this fall. I was looking at them last week, and I'll be honest with you, there's a part of me that was like, why did I do this? Why didn't I just use the other text, right? And yet I get excited about the possibility of what might come out of new. Abby, I have a quick question for you though. Like, what about, because everybody is wired differently. So you're talking about, like I'm looking at the syllabus, I'm planning the year, I get excited, I imagine. What about for teachers who might say, that's hard for me to imagine? Not that even they might even not be afraid to ask the question why. It's hard for them to say, but then what? And not for even lack of trying. Like it's just really hard. Like, I don't know what I'm putting you on the spot here, but what might you encourage either for those people or even school leaders who are listening?
Yeah. So I'm a big fan of backwards design.
Okay.
And so that's, I guess, what I would suggest. It's actually an educational theory. And McTeague and who's the other? Wiggins. Are the authors of that book. And start with what the end goal is and work backwards. Yeah. Right? Instead of what content do I want to cover, what do I want them to be able to do at the end of the year, at the end of this unit. So start with the semester, right? What does the final look like?
Interesting.
And then, so what about the unit before that? What do they have to be able to do? And the one before that. And then map out those big goals and then start working backwards into, how are we going to get there?
Yeah. Oh, it's really good.
Which I think is a little, because once you know where you're going, I think that's the part that you need to have clear. And then the fun part is, what are all the ways that we can get there? And the text is incredibly helpful if you can find it at a library or, but it's called Understanding by Design.
Really good one.
backwards design.
The text is Understanding by Design.
Okay.
And maybe we can put a link to that in the show notes too. How about you, Dave? Well, you're also really folks. I'm not just saying this. This is what I love about teaching with Dave and I, because they're both imaginative and creative.
As are you.
No, in a different way though, but in a different way.
Totally.
Totally. But I think that's where I always walk out of your classes. Like, before you answer this question, so I'm still pretty new here. Unbelievable, starting year 3. But in my first year, we have a year-long faculty orientation, so it doesn't just happen in the first week.
Right.
We literally would meet every 2 weeks with all the new faculty, and Dave actually led that. And one of my takeaways from that is I have very specific pedagogical moves I use now because you modeled that.
I'm honored to hear that.
Yeah, no, but it was also really, folks, it was also really intimidating, because you know what it's like if you watch good teaching, you're like, I could never do that. And yet I have to remind myself my goal isn't to be Dave.
No.
It's to be me, and what can we what can we learn from that? But anyway, sorry, I digress.
No,
but Dave,
right.
what sort of, because you are imaginative, so what goes into planning, or what would you do to encourage someone who might not see themselves that way?
So that's the tricky thing. I appreciate the way you framed that, and thank you. That was very kind of you to say that. But that work of imagination is something that comes relatively easy for me. Like I got 57 great ideas. Well, actually, 56 of them are terrible, but the one is a great idea, right? And so, like, I'm willing to just try stuff, and that sounds like a cop-out answer, right? But like, it doesn't matter how cockamamie the idea might seem on the front end of it. Like, you don't know actually until you try it with students. And this is the thing. Maybe this is because I was a middle school teacher for a long time, and so you kind of get over the fear of, I'm going to try something weird and the kids are going to hate it, or they're going to just. If you commit to the bit, that's my advice, right?
Yeah.
Commit to the bit. So if you've got this crazy idea, when I taught our science methods class, I've got this activity that I stole from somebody else. Oh, great teachers always steal. If you see a good one, steal it, right? Make it your own thing. The activity is called Sink and Lincoln. And so you get a penny, right? Abraham Lincoln on the head of the U.S. penny. And you ask the students to make a prediction on it. Like, how many, you got a little dropper, like a medicine dropper, how many drops of water do you think you can fit on the head of the penny before it starts spilling over the edge? And they, I don't know, 7 or 10 or something. Okay, now you've made a prediction. Now let's try it out. And this comes back around to seeing anew, right? Like when the students, you get them to name something, and then they're always shocked because those drops of water just start piling up, and it makes this bubble of water, like way taller than you think would be possible. And it's like they'll get 40 drops of water on the head of a penny, and they're like, how did that happen? And it's like, okay, now let's talk about, right? But to have some kind of a silly activity and to be willing to commit to, like, we're doing this, and like, you be all in on it, like, eyebrows up, here
Absolutely.
we go. Right?
Yeah, and then to be able to reference back to that, right?
Yes, right.
Yeah.
Because then they've experienced this thing, and
experiences are key. Yeah.
For our Canadian listeners, we don't have pennies in Canada anymore, but but if you can find one, how many drops of water can you put on Queen Elizabeth's head? This is a question that we've all wanted to answer for you. So can I ask? I know we're getting long on time, but I have one more question, and this is also a confession. Is one of the reasons, I think, especially when I was a high school English teacher, that it was hard for me to see anew. I didn't want to give up control. If I have to do it a different way, that means the way I'm doing it must be wrong. And that gets at my identity. But one of the excuses I would often use, if I'm quite honest, is I'm just getting them ready for the real world. You can have all that imagination. You can teach them to juggle, Dave. When are they ever going to be in an office having to learn how to juggle? No, but I'm just saying, like, I can hear myself 20 years ago. I don't have time for them to juggle. Like, I got to get them ready for the real world. So I'm just wondering, when you hear that line, or when and I want to be like honest in saying, like, I when people say that, I believe that they are committed to that. Like, they want, like, like, hey, there's not going to be, you either get your assignment done or it's not. It's a 0. This isn't how the real world works, and I believe that they are committed to that, just as you are committed to those things. How might you respond to that? Because I do feel I used that. What would you have said to 30-year-old Matt Beamers, who said to you, "That sounds great, but I'm getting them ready for the real world"? What would you have said to me, Abby?
There is no way that I can prepare you as a teacher for every scenario that you will encounter, right? As a teacher educator, you are going to need problem solving, ingenuity, and creativity every day of your life at your job, right? And I tell my students that too, when they don't like the creative assignment that I give them. And I tell them, one time, you guys, I had a student put another student in a huge garbage can on wheels and push him down the ramp.
Oh, no.
In our high school, where there was a concrete wall at the end. Right? Like, this is the scene that I came upon on my lunchtime duty. Right. There's not a teacher education course that can prepare you for what to do in that scenario.
Please finish the story, Abby. What happened?
Right. He hit the wall is what happened.
Oh, my goodness.
It was terrible. It was awful.
Oh, that is terrible.
It was terrible. And
I feel so bad that I'm laughing.
That's what I was just going to say.
He's okay now. But it was not good, right? And so, like, you're always going to need to be creative. You're always going to need to problem solve. And so you have to exercise those muscles in your brain. I need you to be uncomfortable and to be used to being uncomfortable and to be able to think yourself out of that. And to have some internal capacity for I don't know what to do, to move through that and to just do it. Just do something.
Yeah, that's good.
I would actually pick up on very similar thoughts to that, right? Teachers got to be resilient and they got to be flexible. And being playful helps you to build both that resilience and that flexibility, right? And so that's, I guess, what I would argue, right? These kinds of things that we're talking about, maybe they're building in some of that kind of playfulness. And I guess my other response is when people talk about, got to get kids ready for the real world, they live in the real world. Like if you're a third grader, third grade classroom is your real world. So how about we get them ready for living in that world?
Third grader.
There's a part of me that wonders that sometimes. And I understand where people are coming from when they say we got to get them ready, because we do have an eye towards the future. We do have an eye towards making sure they're prepared for the rest of their life.
Oh, that's good.
But we should remember who they are right now.
To see them anew in that way.
Perhaps.
Thank you. Friends, we know that your time is valuable, and we want to thank you for joining us today for another hallway conversation, whether it's this day, this week, or this month, or as you prepare for the beginning of your school year. We hope the Lord gives you what you stand in need of, and we just want to send you from here with a blessing. So may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace and give you peace and give you peace. Amen. Have a good week, everyone, and thanks for listening.
This podcast was literally dreamed up during one of our actual hallway conversations. Our music is by Ethan Mulder. Hallway Conversations is created and produced by Matt Beamers, Abby DeGroat, and Dave Mulder. Hey, we have a favor to ask of you. Would you be willing to rate this podcast or write a review in your podcast app? Or if you found this conversation interesting or helpful, would you consider sharing it on your social media? Those things really do help podcasters out, and we would be so, so grateful. Thanks for listening, friends.
Is the button flash? Is the red light flashing?
It's good.
Okay,
Mine was always good.
You're good to go.
Ooh.
All right.
The work of imagination.
Yeah, that was good.